Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Hancock, and along with my friend in foolishness, Patrick Curran, we make up Quantitude. We're a podcast dedicated to all things quantitative, ranging from the relevant to the completely irrelevant. In honor of April Fool's Day, today's episode is about being fooled. Specifically, quantitative things that can fool you, and some classic songs about being fooled to go with them. Along the way, we also mention Ukus, the spaghetti harvest, sucker, meet the new boss, traditions of doing things wrong, naked garbage bag poker, old man rants, rich Facebook friends, the Scarlet R, RRRRRR, bugs versus features, sucking statistically significantly less, farewell tours, seabirds with a white wine reduction, and Mother's Day. We hope we fool you into enjoying today's episode. I'm going to tell you a story. A while ago, I was asked to come up to Princeton to do a one-day workshop. You know I'm an early guy, so I got in my car at like 4 in the morning, and I drove up to New Jersey. So it's like a 3-hour drive. And right before the workshop started, I got a text from my wife, Goldie, and it said that there was a case of lice in our son Quinn's elementary school classroom, and it was a kid that he sits next to. My wife was born and raised in Hawaii, where lice is a real problem. They call them ukus, the Hawaiian word for lice, ukus. So she's really, really sensitive to this issue. So she sent me this text right before 9 o'clock, which is right when I'm about to start teaching. And she said, make sure I check myself, be really careful, be vigilant and all of that. And so I'm like, all right. I got to start. Things seem to be going okay in the workshop. The room that I'm teaching in has a whole wall that is mirrors. When I have this group working on things, trying some software projects and all of that, I'll take a little side glance into the mirror. It's like, okay, I don't see anything in my hair, but I'm getting itchier and itchier. By the time I finish the workshop, I'm really itchy and I'm starting to feel it on my body also. And I get in the car and I drive the 3 hours home from New Jersey, and the whole way home, like scratching my head, I'm scratching my body. I pull into the garage, and our garage, as you know, is connected to the house. Goldie opens the door from the house, and she's got goggles on. And she throws me a plastic garbage bag, and she says, all of your clothes in the bag now. So I take off all of my nice teaching workshop clothes. I get everything in the bag. I am buck-ass naked, holding this garbage bag full of my clothes. I say, okay, I'm ready. She opens the door to the garage, and she's standing there, and the kids are standing there, and they all go, April Fools.
Now, the beauty of the story is it was actually April Fools on them, because they opened the door and saw you buck naked holding a garbage bag. I mean, let's talk about who's more traumatized here. I got to tell you, if we're going to go into old man rant, which takes nothing at all for me to move into, I have conveyed my concerns about New Year's resolutions.
Oh, yeah.
I would rank April Fool's Day above New Year's resolutions.
Really?
In things that annoy me. I just don't like being tricked. Mm-hmm. So much of the time, people prey on your good nature.
Right.
And then are like, we got you. Oh, man, I can't believe you were so gullible. I'm glad you're enjoying this, because I'm sure not.
The funny thing about you and I is that we have zero problem making fools of ourselves in front of other people, but we don't really like being made a fool of.
You know, the ones I like are smart ones. So one of my dad's favorites, this one, you can go out on YouTube and see this, but way back, I don't know, it must have been in the 1950s. The BBC did a documentary on the fall harvest season of spaghetti.
Oh, yeah.
And it was brilliant. There were these women in traditional Italian garb with big baskets, and spaghetti is hanging from the trees, and they're picking the spaghetti.
The harvest.
And my dad loved it because of the cleverness. But also all over America, people were writing the television station and asking where can they buy a spaghetti tree, and they wanted to grow homegrown spaghetti. That I really like.
The last 2 weeks of March are an anxious time for the spaghetti farmer. There's always the chance of a late frost, which, while not entirely ruining the crop, generally impairs the flavor and makes it difficult for him to obtain top prices in world markets. But now these dangers are over, and the spaghetti harvest goes forward.
But you know what? I think the sucker, I can't believe you fell for that, can apply to quant too. All of us navigate quant on a daily basis. And we thought that we would do a back and forth. What are some ways that you can get abjectly fooled in quant and not know it?
Absolutely.
Quant opens the garage door and you're standing there buck naked holding a garbage bag and Quant goes, "Sucker! I can't believe you fell for that." What we thought we would do is two things. Puzzle through a couple of things that really we have been fooled by.
Sure.
But also, there are so many great fooled songs.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That along with each of us that we get to pick for a topic of getting fooled in quant, we get to pick a song or some kind of pop culture reference.
So I don't actually know what Patrick is going to say, which for those of you who have been with us as long as we've been around, know that that's just dangerous.
Greg and I neither know what the other is going to talk about, and we neither know what the music is that we picked, but we're just going to bounce back and forth and talk about things that fooled us and that maybe you can not fall for being caught naked with a garbage bag in your own work.
You are just going to ride that image?
That's the theme of today. You're going to do the artwork for this, and I got to tell you.
Why don't you start us off? Set the tempo here.
I'm going to pick maybe one of the greatest songs of all time. It is by The Who, off the album Who's Next, 1971. We Won't Get Fooled Again.
We don't get fooled again. Don't get fooled again.
That's an excellent choice.
One of the simplest verses is also one of my favorite, and it's at the very end. And it is "Meet the new boss, same as the old boss."
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
If that doesn't capture life in academia, here's mine. Failed longitudinal invariance in growth models.
Ooh.
We often want to model change over time in something that's of interest to us. Occasionally, we can do that with a single measure, a single indicator. If you're out in the bio world, maybe height, maybe weight, maybe BMI. Most of us in the social behavioral educational sciences, we're interested in modeling growth in things that we can't directly observe. So we have latent factors. We have multiple indicators that indicate depression or anxiety or gratitude or hope for the future or whatever that might be. On prior episodes, we have waxed poetic about all the advantages of having a multiple indicator latent factor, and we would want to fit a growth model directly to those latent factors. The problem is, though, is we can't always buy the car that we want. We buy the car that we can afford. Through the complexity of the model, the characteristics of our sample, we often can't estimate multiple indicator latent factors at each time point. And so the field almost universally makes a manifest score at a given time point. So we want to look at development of gratitude in children, and we have a 6-item gratitude measure for each kid at each time point. We add up their responses and divide by 6, and we have a mean score. I have done this. You have done this. The vast majority of the field has done this. Part of it is a circularity, is that's how the field does it, and so that's how I'm going to do it. So there's some tautology in
There's
that.
a tradition of doing it that
There's
way.
a tradition of doing things wrong because we've always done things wrong. But what is the price we pay in doing that? We've talked on prior episodes that when you take the mean of a set of items or a sum of a set of items, you are actually imposing a measurement model. You're saying all the items load equally on the underlying construct, and you're saying that there is no measurement error. What if your items aren't all equally indicative of the underlying construct? What if there is some measurement error in your items? Well, that's within time. We may want to allow those factor loadings to differ, those residual variances to exist. But holy cow, what about across time? If you're looking at gratitude in children, might the very nature of how children respond to those items change over time? So not only do we not have factor loadings that are exactly equal to 1, we allow them to vary within time, but what if those change over time as well? Well, here's where you get tricked. When we fit a growth model to our repeated measures, we are actually making a very specific assumption about the nature of measurement of that construct over time. Yeah. We are imposing what's called strong invariance. What that means is at each given time point, the indicators relate to the latent factor with a value of lambda or loadings, and nu, which are item intercepts. But are you ready for this? Those are equal over time. Yeah. If the factor loading of the first item is 0.72, it's 0.72 at every time point. And if the item intercept is 0.58, it is 0.58 at every time point. It is only under that assumption that we can say, oh, I have a starting point and a rate of change in the construct of gratitude over time. And that is what we require to make that inference. So how do you get fooled? Well, we fail that strong invariance over time. We don't incorporate it into our model. We fit a lovely latent curve model to our repeated manifest variables. We write a lovely discussion section about it, but there's no true growth in Ada over time. You just built a growth model to account for your failed invariance.
I like that one a lot. And I like it so much I hesitate to add anything to it because I think there's so much actually to add to this particular topic. That would be a good one to unpack in a much larger episode because when you're trying to understand change over time, those kinds of issues around invariance and specifically which parameters are non-invariant, if any, how those can permeate your model in ways that are completely deceptive. I think we should talk a lot more about that. So I'm going to see your opening bid.
Ooh, we're playing naked garbage bag poker.
All right. So this is really tricky, the whole song thing, because I have so many song interests. I'm going to go with a song that I'm going to bet, don't know. Oh. It's been recorded a number of times. But even if you don't know the song, you know the title of the song, because the title of the song is I Pity the Fool.
Oh, Mr. T.
Exactly.
That was the catchphrase in elementary school of a bunch of little Colorado kids.
I pity the fool.
I've said that to my kids, and they know they've heard that, but it's just kind of vague, right? It floats around in the cultural ether. I was a high school teacher when Mr. T still had cultural popularity. And I had an ink stamp with Mr. T's image on it that I would put when kids got an A on one of my tests, like when I was teaching chemistry or math. The ink stamp that I had Mr. T's image, and it said, I pity the fool who gets an A on Mr. Hancock's test. And so the kids loved it. It's like, did you get a Mr. T stamp? Did you get a Mr. T stamp? All right, I'm back. The song is called I Pity the Fool. It's been recorded by a lot of different people. The one I like the best is by a bluesy R&B guy named Bobby Bland. I Pity the Fool.
I pity the fool. I say I pity the fool.
Outstanding. All right. I want to hear your naked garbage bag.
All right. So mine is so basic that it is a rant. Oh, no. It's not a rant. It's an April Fool. Dang it.
Oh, we're at a point in our life that everything is a rant.
So this has to do with correlation and the fact that people let themselves be fooled by correlation every single day. Right? If you go to the popular news sources that people consult, I can't even really call them news. Correlation is used all the time, and I think it's used to tease, to be provocative, and it doesn't even have to have any truth associated with it anymore, and it drives me crazy. I Googled correlation, and I clicked on news. I have a bunch of stuff on my phone right now, completely current. Let's see what we have. No correlation between heat wave and the demand for fans, coolers, and air conditioners. Swear to God, that's the first one.
There's no correlation between purchasing alcohol and consuming alcohol.
Study finds a correlation between having rich Facebook friends and good heart health. I can't make this stuff up. I think correlation has turned into a soundbite, really, that is just a little more than bullshit, if I'm being completely honest. We know as methodologists there are so many ways that correlations can fool us. The presence of a correlation or the absence of a correlation can fool us because there are so many things that influence correlation. Outliers, nonlinearity, issues related to measurement error. You and I, right, that's our daily bread. Having error in the measures that you're correlating can tremendously dampen their relation to the point of you going, well, there's no correlation. There is a correlation. You just did such a crappy job of measuring those things that you couldn't possibly detect that particular relation. And then there's all the issues around correlation and causality. There's a spurious association really just due to other variables, or the absence of correlation is really due to the fact that there are other relations operating both positively and negatively that make the overall relation appear to be near zero, but it's really just much, much more complicated than that. So we get fooled by correlations all the time, and I just want people out there to stop it. I want you to be critical consumers of correlations. There's a beautiful quote by Fisher from 1958. It says, "If we choose a group of social phenomena with no antecedent knowledge of the causation or the absence of causation among them, then calculation of correlation coefficients, total or partial, will not advance us a step towards evaluating the importance of the causes at work." And so he's essentially saying, without any theory, correlations are freaking useless. And you know what? I pity the fool who gets fooled by a correlation.
I pity the fool.
Oh, nice tie back.
Thank you very much, everybody.
I will go ahead and hang this scarlet R around my neck as the new updating of the scarlet letter. I think all of us fall for this. It's not an old man Muppet in the balcony rant about kids these days.
Wake me when the show starts.
It's already been on a while.
Wake me when it's over.
The unit of analysis for everything that we do is a variance covariance matrix and mean vector. Now, of course, if you have missing data or if you have other kinds of situations, we do raw data, but we still build up likelihoods from partial present data to infer the covariance structure and mean vector of a particular model. I don't always take a set of variables and look at bivariate scatter plots with a smoother line through to look for nonlinearity.
Right.
That should be standard. You just look at every bivariate scatter plot and see if there's an outlier, see if there's a little cluster of aberrant observations. The big one is just simply if there's a nonlinearity. Does it tail off at the end? And there's actually a pretty strong relation between two items, but the correlation is 0.1 because you're imposing a line over a curve. And then where the horses really get out of the barn are partial effects or conditional effects. I was in a student dissertation committee meeting not long ago where in this day and age, they looked at a correlation matrix and dropped any predictors that weren't correlated with the dependent variable.
Oh my gosh.
There are so many different ways that that is not a good way to move forward, but not the least of which is what about an interaction? You can very easily have a relation between X and Y that's near zero and Z and Y that's near zero, but have a huge X by Z interaction in the prediction of Y.
Totally.
So I'm going to go ahead for the rest of the recording session and wear this big red R around my neck.
I like it.
You know what's funny? I was a skier. I grew up in Colorado, and you still to this day, even with all electronics, you have lift tickets that you stick to your jackets. Mm-hmm. If you are caught on the slope skiing recklessly, a ski patrol will stop you and they will write a big red R on your lift ticket as your first warning for reckless. And if they catch you again, they cut off your ticket and you're done for the day.
Ooh.
When you're in lift line next and the ski patrol has the next line move forward, if they see someone with an R, and I have to admit this has happened to me on multiple occasions,
You just draw it on yourself.
they make you step forward by yourself, and the ski patrol yells out, R!
Oh my
And
gosh.
you go all by yourself, and everyone in line claps their poles together and goes, R, 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 as you go down. And it's this total social shaming. We should start doing this for correlations. Okay, I'm going to move from my song to the first concert I ever saw.
Okay.
It's at Red Rocks Amphitheater, which was the Doobie Brothers.
Yeah.
The song that I am picking from the Doobie Brothers is What a Fool Believes.
Great song.
And it's actually really great lyrics. And the one that I love is, But what a fool believes, he sees. All right, here's my second How Do You Get Fooled. Again, this is go ahead and do the equivalent R. Because I have fallen for this as well. When you're operating in an analytic framework where there are not omnibus measures of fit as you have in the SEM. So I have groused about this in the past. I will grouse about this in the future. Very briefly, in the structural equation model, for a traditional standard kind of setting, we have a thing called an omnibus test of fit. You have a chi-square, you have an RMSEA, a TLI, a CFI, an IFI, an SRMR, this whole alphabet soup of things that are increasingly useless in evaluating your model fit. But this is a huge advantage of the SEM. You estimate a modeling, you get what is sometimes called, and I think inaccurately called, a standalone assessment of model fit. Why do I think it's inaccurate? Because it's not a standalone. It is actually a chi-square difference. It is actually a likelihood ratio test. And what you're doing is comparing your model to what's called a saturated model. And that is where all variables have variances, covariances, and means, and you get a -2 log likelihood from that. You impose restrictions that are associated with your model, and you get a -2 log likelihood. And your standalone, I'm using air quotes that nobody can see, measure of fit is, are you doing harm to your data by imposing your restrictions when compared to the saturated model?
Right.
So it's not really a standalone. It really is a comparison of your model to a saturated. All right, and oh my gosh, we talk till the cows come home about evaluating model fit, and is your RMSEA below 0.5, and is your CFI above 0.95, and this is viewed as a big advantage of the SEM. There is a whole class of models that don't have those measures of fit.
Right.
Some live in the SEM. You do an MNLFA, you're imposing nonlinear constraints, you don't have those. If you use maximum likelihood with discrete measures, you don't have those. But the entire multi-level model does not have those.
Right.
And the reason in the MLM, you don't have a saturated model in the same way that you do in the SEM, because you're breaking apart moment structure across different levels. Level 1, level 2, whether that be repeated measures or clustered because of structure or whatever that might be. All right, so here's the problem is anybody who are multi-level modelers don't have chi-squares. They don't have RMSEAs. They don't have CFIs and IFIs. What you do is have what's called deviance, which is actually the same -2 log likelihood that you would get out for a similarly parameterized model in the SEM. This is most clear in growth models.
Right.
We know that they're isomorphic. You can fit the same model in MLM and SEM. You get the same -2 log likelihood, but the SEM gives you these measures of fit and the MLM doesn't. Well, when I learned the MLM, this bothered me, that there were no overall measures of fit. But the more I used it, the more I actually saw that not as a bug, but as a feature. And mostly because I don't think those omnibus measures of fit are particularly good in the SEM. So how do you get fooled? Well, in the MLM, we are intellectually goosed to do model comparisons. You fit model A and you fit model B. Does model B lead to an improvement in fit? You have model B, you fit model C. Does model C lead to an improvement in fit? And model C is the best fitting of all of your models within the MLM. It doesn't mean that it doesn't suck. It just means C is better than B, but C still sucks.
It sucks statistically significantly less than the
It
others.
sucks less. We can unambiguously demonstrate that C is the best fitting model of all alternatives that we tested, but we take that to an SEM and reparameterize it, and it doesn't fit with respect to all the usual omnibus measures that we have. So how do I think we can get fooled in the MLM and in any model where we only have access to one of those log likelihoods and not the one with the saturated model? Is we can write a very compelling Agatha Christie story that B is better than A, C is better than B, and C is our final model. But we don't know if C still sucks.
I pity the fool.
I think there's a way around it, but very few of us do anything about it, and that's diagnostics in MLM. There's a whole class of things that we can say, okay, we're going to take model D. Now we're going to look at level 1 residuals. We're going to look at level 2 residuals. We're going to look at scatter plots to look for patterns in residuals. There are lots of ways that can say, okay, I landed on model C, and now we're going to poke at it to see if things look the way they should. Raudenbush and Breich have an entire chapter in their 2001 textbook on hierarchical linear models that everyone should do and virtually no one does. But that's how I think I stand in the garage naked with a garbage bag and the door opens and there is the multi-level model saying model C was the best of your 4 models, but it still sucks. Ha ha, sucker.
And that's the story of April Fool's Day.
Dad, I was telling the story.
Yeah, the funny thing about global fit indices is that we want them to some extent, and yet we still know that they don't provide a very good overall picture of a model because this is a global diagnostic, and our problems are often very, very specific. And I think when you get to the multi-level model, there's a certain voice that says, oh, I guess I don't have any global fit measures. And yet, if you did have global fit measures, it's not entirely clear what you would do with them besides use them to gauge the model overall, rather than trying to diagnose what's wrong with your model. And as you said, there are diagnostics that we can use, although people don't use them maybe enough to try to pinpoint where some weak spots are. But in the end, global fit measures are sort of meh for me. If you use them to say that your model is great or use them to say that your model is poor, I can't help wondering if that's what a fool believes.
Wow. All right.
Really? Give me a little bit more on that.
All right.
Take 2. I can't help but think that's what a fool believes.
Huh.
Okay, we're going to work on this.
Yeah.
All right, my turn. I was thinking as you were talking about bands that I've seen who have Fool in one of their songs, and I actually have a bunch written down right here. I don't know that I would go with any of them, but I saw Foghat. For anybody who knows Foghat, they have Fool for the City. I saw Styx like 4 or 5 times, and they have a song called You're Fooling Yourself, which is actually a really good song, I think. I saw Whitesnake, Fool for Your Loving. I saw Cinderella, Not Your Fool. But I'm going to go with one of the bands that I saw, and I saw them when they were really young. And I mentioned them already on a previous episode that I used one of their songs to be my wake-up song when I was in college. This is Def Leppard and their song Foolin'.
Very nice. I did see Def Leppard, not Cinderella. I had to draw a line in the sand somewhere. Def Leppard and you know who played with them? The Scorpions.
Yeah, I've seen them several times.
Yep.
All right. Now, last time, the things that fool me, I went with something very broad that was correlation. I'm going with something really broad again. And like you said, we can't help but turn everything into something that irritates us.
It annoys me that you say that.
Okay. The thing that irritates me, it is just straight up bad sampling. And by bad sampling, I could say convenient sampling. I could say the crap that they do on Twitter polls, just generally these non-representative samples. And again, for me, one of the big problems is that it translates into crap that people believe, stuff that fools them. You read some meme or some little provocative headline that is supposed to make you think that that's legitimate research. And for the typical consumer, your knowledge ends there. You don't dig deeper and realize how absolutely bad that study is, right? So, quick example that I saw that said something like 90% of seabirds have ingested plastic. And I love seabirds. They're wonderful.
Oh, I know, especially with a white wine reduction.
Oh my gosh, a butter and garlic demi-glaze.
Okay,
with
go on. I'm getting...
Yeah. No, but if you dig in and you realize the way those studies were done is they went around a bunch of beaches on some islands around Australia and found dead birds. And they looked inside the dead birds and they go, 90% of the birds have got plastic in them.
Throw it on the Barbie.
You could eat around it. So that kind of thing bothers me. You know, if you want to do a study like that, okay, but you have to frame the conclusion specifically in terms of 90% of dead birds that we found on beaches while we were on our 6th Foster's lager.
Foster's, Australian for beer.
Had plastic. But when you have these poor samples, think about someone who is trying to do something as simple as estimate what a mean is or a rate of occurrence of something, right? If your sample is not representative of some population that you care about, you saying that, whoa, the average for 4th graders is this. Yeah, but you only got kids from these types of schools, or you only got kids from these particular socioeconomic backgrounds. You paint a completely misleading picture. And if someone doesn't drill into that, then that somehow gets promoted to fact. And God help you if you have a horrible sample and you're trying to make causal inferences, whether it's in an experimental setting or a non-experimental setting. If there's nothing you can do to correct for the bias that you're aware of by taking certain variables into account or weighting your sample to try to restore it to proportions that are more aligned with your particular population, bad samples lead to problems with internal validity, problems with external validity. And we could just talk for hours about these kinds of problems. But where it really bothers me is that people are fooled by this all the time. Because this, just like correlation, translates into some soundbite headline. It's all that people look at. It passes for research in the consumer's eyes, and it gets promoted to truth. It drives me crazy.
And it's not undone by putting a line in the limitation that says caution is warranted when generalizing findings beyond the characteristics of the sample studied here.
Right.
That does not get you out of the problems that Greg just described. First, what the hell does caution is warranted mean anyway? You can't just shrug and say, I can only generalize to who's here. We have to be so much more thoughtful about that external validity. There's massively the internal validity issue. Remember, internal validity is, are we properly identifying true causal effects? External is the generalization findings across person, place, and time. One of the things that drives me nuts among my fellow psychology researchers is justifying using a convenience sample by saying, well, we are studying universal human processes. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter where we got people. It doesn't matter what their individual characteristics are. These are universal across all people. So the fact that I used a predominantly Caucasian, predominantly female, self-selected sample from the undergrad subject pool
right.
is justified because it doesn't matter. If I went out and did a broader, more heterogeneous sampling, everything would be the same because these are human universals. I just think that's a mass overstatement about how things work among human beings when we're studying things like environment and behavior and emotions and things like that.
Yep.
All right, I get my last song and I get my last How Have I Been Fooled in the Past. I am going to go to the queen of R&B. I was not able to see her in concert, and that's Aretha Franklin. Chain of Fools.
Chain, chain, chain.
And by the way, if you have kids and they hit a particular age, straight up an amazing pizza night movie is The Blues Brothers.
No question.
It has some of the greatest classic music scenes that were filmed in the wild, in the streets of Chicago. And one is with Aretha Franklin, and you gotta see it. It is absolutely amazing.
I actually question your parenting skills if you do not show your children The Blues Brothers.
You better think about what you're saying. You better think about the consequences of your action.
You better think about what's trying to do to me, yeah, think.
I don't need to dig into this too terribly deeply. And my fingerprints are also on maybe why it can be a way that can fool you. So very briefly, when I talked about longitudinal invariance, I talked about getting scale scores. And there are times where, even though we ideally want to model latent variables in their native state, what that is you estimate a model with multiple indicator latent factors and allow the loadings to be different, allow the residuals to be different, whatever way that is, that's the gold standard. But there are many situations in which we can't do that. The model is too complicated. The sample is too small. It's a pick your battles thing. You can't build in a latent variable model. You need to use scale scores. And I previously described why those scale scores, if they are means or sums, can be limited about the restrictions that you impose. Well, a really promising middle ground is to say, well, wait. I can't estimate my latent variable model within the confines of, say, a multiple group, multivariate growth curve model. But I could estimate the latent variables on their own and get what are called factor scores. We had a whole episode on this that actually my daughter titled at the dinner table of Wait, Don't Tell Me.
That's right.
But WEIGHT. They are funnier than I am. They are smarter than I am. They have more friends than I do. There are many ways of doing this, but what you do is you estimate a factor model and you get the parameter matrices from that model. You get factor loadings, you get item intercepts, you get residual variances, you get variance covariance matrices among the latent factors. And then there are a whole host of different ways that we can use those matrices to get scale scores. They're called factor scores. But what they are is very much like a mean or a sum, but we use the parameters from the latent variable model instead of just adding them up and dividing by how many they are. So it's kind of a middle ground. You can get regression scores, you can get Bartlett scores, you can get constrained covariance scores. There are many types of these. We can even take those models and build in differential item functioning. Do we have covariates? Might those factor loadings depend on age or a biological sex or treatment condition? I've got a couple of papers I wrote on what I call covariate-informed factor scores. So if there are sex differences in a couple of items, we can actually build that into the model, and then you get this better score. These methods work really well when you have a large sample size and when you have the proper model.
Oh, that.
We don't often have large sample sizes. Rarely, if ever, do we have the proper model. And then think about those parameter matrices that go into your scoring. You have factor loadings. Well, those have standard errors associated with them. You get smaller sample sizes and think about estimating it, and you get a factor loading of 0.72, all right? Now do a mental experiment, resample, re-estimate it. You might get a factor loading for the same item on the same factor of 0.58. Do it again, 0.81.
Right.
These are sampling distributions. The problem is these factor scores are only as good as the parameters that serve as weights that go into those. And there are many situations where your fancy pants factor score might actually be worse, if not substantially worse, than just adding them up.
Yeah.
The old phrase that my colleague would use with me back in the day, and I was like, no, you're wrong. And 20 years later, I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. The sum score is always wrong, but you know how it's wrong, and it's wrong in the same way every time.
Yeah.
So how do I get fooled? I flex in front of the mirror getting my covariate-informed factor scores that are actually worse than if I just added up the items and divided by how many I have.
And if you take a Bayesian approach, then it is a chain of fools. You are giving me nothing. Nothing here. Come on. Whatever.
All right, I'm out, man. Those are my 3. I think if I count right, you get one more.
All right. You mentioned that you didn't get to see Aretha Franklin in concert. My last song is by someone that I was going to see in concert until I realized the concert was on Mother's Day, and that was to see Prince. Prince is one of my favorite artists of all time, one of the most musically talented people ever, I think. The number of instruments he could play, his creativity, the volume of work that he turned out. And Prince has a song from his 1999 album called Don't Let Him Fool Ya, and I love this song. I love all things Prince.
Don't let him fool ya. Don't let him fool ya. Pretty soon you'll have to take it back.
Oh, that's a great choice.
All right, my last thing, and I'm pulling back even more broadly. When we take a statistics class, sometimes, especially when we have a gifted instructor, we are empowered to try these things. In fact, we're probably fooled a little bit to think we understand these things and think we can do things a little bit better than we actually can. And being fooled in that way, being fooled in a way that you're motivated, I am absolutely fine with, because it gets you in the door, right? Gets you wanting to try things. And then we can help you once you come through the door, help you try those more complicated analyses, get you to be able to answer some of those questions. So in that regard, I am fine with you being fooled. I'll tell you how I'm not okay with people being fooled. And that is when they take statistics classes and they think that they can't do it. And even more, they think that they couldn't possibly be a quantitative methodologist. Quantitative methodologists exist in all fields. They are not people who just specialize in quantitative methodology. In fact, some of the best quantitative methodologists in history are people who came from substantive disciplines. Everybody out there who says, I'm not really a quantitative methodologist, you are fooling yourself, you are part of a chain of fools, you're wearing a scarlet R. Wait, I lost that one.
Yeah, come back to me, Greg.
Okay, where were we? If you are a psychologist, you can do methodological research. If you are a corpus linguist, you can be doing methodological research. If you are someone who does mental health research, you can be a quantitative researcher. A lot of times, what quantitative research involves is bringing new methodologies into your particular discipline, or adapting those methodologies to be able to deal with the special kinds of data that you have. You might just be the ambassador that your field needs to be able to kick their methods up a notch, to be able to help them think about problems more creatively. And I hate it when people have sort of fooled themselves into thinking that because they haven't taken a ton of math classes, or because they haven't taken statistics with a capital S, that they cannot contribute to the methodological literature. Nonsense. You absolutely can. And I want people to be able to ask themselves, not if they can contribute to their own domain methodologically, but how they can do it.
I love that. And this has come up in prior discussions, but one of my frustrations with some, not all, but some of our colleagues in this field is, I don't know if it's self-preservation, I don't know if it's a real belief, but often it will be conveyed that this field is hard, and there's only a special few that are able to do it. And don't worry about what the computer's doing. You just look at the output and let us do the heavy lifting behind the scenes. And it infuriates me.
Right.
Because that is simply not the case.
That's right.
And to convey in any way, shape, or form that only a few high priests can kindle the flame in the cave of statistics and development and application is just appallingly false. So I like going out on, don't fool yourself. That is, don't be suckered by people saying you can't do this. You're not capable of doing this. You can't contribute at that level. That is standing in the garage naked with the garbage bag and having the field open the door and say, sucker.
And it all comes back to the naked garbage bag. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We hope you enjoyed today's foolishness and maybe learned a few things along the way, because you might have been fooled before, but we hope
We don't get fooled again. Don't get fooled again.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care.
Thank you so much for listening. You can subscribe to Quantitude on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your Aretha Franklin hits, and please leave us a review. You can also follow us on Twitter. We are at QuantitudePod. And check out our webpage at quantitudepod.org for past episodes, searchable archives, playlists, show notes, and other cool stuff. Finally, you can get Quantitude-themed merch at redbubble.com, where all proceeds from non-bootlegged authorized products go to donors choose to support low-income schools. You have been listening to Quantitude, in our 4th year of fooling you into thinking this is even remotely a good use of your valuable time. Quantitude has been brought to you by a suite of ways in which you can be fooled in academia, including that the absence of poor teaching reviews reflects engaging and effective teaching, that higher numbers of publications denote greater contributions to science, that the reputational quality of a university is deterministically related to the quality of education that is actually received, that scientific standing is solely determined by the number of Twitter followers, that talking about equity and inclusion is the same as enhancing equity and inclusion, that getting an A in a class indicates a command of the material that was covered, that colleagues who speak the most have the most to offer, and that only papers with lots of equations count as quantitative. This is most definitely not NPR.